What if I told you that knowing which of these two artworks someone liked changed how you treated them? Well, that's what a group of psychologists in the 1970s discovered in an experiment known as the minimal group paradigm. In the study, two groups were created by presenting a series of artworks by expressionist artists Paul Klee and Vasily Kandinsky to the participants, asking them whose artworks they preferred, and then assigning them to the Klee or Kandinsky group accordingly. It's important to note that while participants knew who they were completing the study with, they didn't know the identities of the other members of their group, the in-group, or the other group, the out-group. There was no existing competition for resources or sources of conflict between the groups, and no interactions between the groups. This is to say, they made people a member of a group in the most bare-bones way possible. Participants were then given matrices to fill out, which allocated points to a member of their group and a member of the other group, and these points were to be distributed out as money at the end of the experiment. The participants did not allocate points to themselves to avoid any elements of self-interest in the study. The matrices were designed with multiple criteria in mind. Down the lower end, points were distributed based on the maximum difference between groups. Towards the middle, points were distributed based on fairness, and up on the higher end, points were distributed to give both groups the maximum joint profit as well as the maximum in-group profit. What they found might surprise you. Instead of the participants trying to maximize profit or pick the equal options, they instead tended to choose the maximum difference in points for their group. This often meant that members of their group were getting less money and members of the other group got even less. This experiment says a lot about our social identities and how we perceive group membership. Remember that participants knew nothing about the identities of members of their group or the members of the other group, but still discriminated against the outgroup. Groups formed on a seemingly meaningless criteria had such a strong influence on how they treated each other. People have very strong preferences for those that are part of their social in-group, and this experiment illustrates that point so well. There are a few critiques of the minimal groups paradigm, one of which is that these experiments are carried out in a very artificial environment, so it can be hard to determine whether the reactions are natural or somewhat gamified given the context. The study has also been replicated many times across many different cultures and has shown that the strength of the effect depends on the type of culture. The original study took place in the UK, which is an individualist culture. The study has since been replicated in more collectivist countries, like China, where they found the effect wasn't as strong. A possible explanation for why the effect isn't as strong in collectivist countries could be that their group identities have larger bounds, meaning that they might identify more strongly with other citizens than someone from an individualistic society might. It's easy to see how this effect is amplified in the real world when there are other factors at play like competition. For example, when sports fans get in arguments or fights with supporters of a different club, but might celebrate a victory of their team with a fellow supporter they don't know too well. Things like this are integral to our identities and make it easier to embrace those a part of the same social group and reject those outside of it. This explains why intergroup conflict has been so prevalent throughout history. When the minimal group paradigm has shown people don't always need a good reason to discriminate against others. So knowing all of this, maybe it's better to focus on the similarities between people to unite us as a big group, instead of the differences that can divide us into separate groups, because it doesn't take much to tip the scales. Thank you for watching.